All right, thank you very much, John, and thank you, Stephen, and everyone from the SIG for this opportunity. Thanks for everyone who is taking time out on their Sunday as well. My name is Marcos. I'm the co-author of a book called Widgets. My co-author Chris is here today too, Chris Alvona. And I'm going to, first of all, very briefly talk about widgets in the context of how TBLT, task-based learning, works. And then we'll have the interview section with John. And then, if you have any questions at that point, that would be a good time. So I'm going to try to get through this relatively quickly in sort of a lightning round. So first of all, about widgets. So widgets is what we call a strong task-based approach to language learning. It's a themed scenario-based simulation that focuses on a workplace scenario. So it's a business English book, but doesn't need to be used in a business context. It focuses mainly on discussions and presentations for university classes, but it also includes writing and opportunities for listening, video, watching. So in fact, it could be used as a 4-skills course, but the main focus is on discussions and presentations. It's ideal for a mixed level class of ideally between 12 and 24 students, but this isn't a strict requirement, and ideally they should be at B1 or higher, CEFR B1 level. But again, it's possible to have a couple of students in the A2 range. It's possible to have 30, even as many as 40 students. It's not the ideal number, but it can work that way. It's a flexible course in that sense. So how does it work? Let me give, first of all, a very brief summary of TBLT, and then I'll talk about how widgets solve some of these challenges from a materials writer's point of view, but also from a teaching point of view. So first of all, in TBLT, meaning is primary. In other words, linguistic accuracy is secondary. And the most important thing is being meaningful, communicating in a meaningful way. This doesn't mean that there is no linguistic accuracy that's involved. It's simply that it's looked at secondarily. Also very important in a task-based approach, learners must initially rely on their own resources to do the task. In other words, they're not pre-taught how to do something, and this is very important. They're not pre-taught the language. And basically the idea here is that when you pre-teach the language, you are necessarily restricting the students in their ability to communicate in a kind of open way by essentially requiring that they use a particular grammar form or vocabulary. And that encroaches on meaningfulness. And that's a problem in TBLT. Now, we can argue about this kind of ideological point of view, but from a TBLT perspective, this is a really important consideration. And as you can imagine, this is a big restriction on textbook design, because what it means is that you can't pre-teach the language. That can be a problem when you're writing a textbook for language learning. And finally, also a very important principle of TBLT is that tasks clearly have a clearly defined outcome that is authentic, and they must be assessed according to that outcome. This is a bit tricky to explain sometimes as well, but the basic idea is this. When we ask a student to engage in a communicative activity that is meaningful, they must be focused on being meaningful, not on using absolutely correct forms of verbs and so on. So for example, if you wanted the student to, for example, you come into the classroom and you teach the past tense, and then you tell the student, now talk about what you did in the summer, it's highly likely that they're going to try to use that form you've just taught in order to talk about their summer. When in fact, if they're sort of openly being meaningful, it is possible to talk about your summer without using the past tense. So it's restrictive to do that. And you have to therefore assess them on whether they have achieved the outcome, which in this case would be to talk about the past tense, not to talk about the past tense, to talk about your summer, right? We can look at another example. Let's think about it this way. If you're ordering a pizza by telephone in a second language and you make all kinds of grammar mistakes, maybe your pronunciation is not very good, how do you know if you have passed, right? This is a problem for me when I order a pizza, right? How do I know that I'm doing it well? Well, I know I'm making all kinds of grammar mistakes, but if the pizza comes and it's correct, then I've passed, right? I've achieved the task. And that's what it means when we say you have to assess based on that authentic outcome. Okay. So how does this work in practice? Well, again, it's tricky to explain. So how do we focus on meaning rather than accuracy? Let's take this example. This is an analogy that I use with my education students here at the university. Here we have an image, right? This is a picture of a bowl of marbles. It's a relatively complex image with lots of detail. It's a photograph, right? It has lots of detail. So if you were to reproduce this image, you would need some kind of method for reproducing it accurately or meaningfully, right? And likewise, language is complex and detailed, and to the point that it's easy to get lost in those details, right? So if we think of this analogy in terms of the details, if you're looking at things like how to do shading, you can think of the analogy in grammar would be using a particular grammar form. It's easy to get lost in those details. Well, there's two basic ways that you can approach reproducing a complex set of information like this. And also like language, right? A complex set of information. So one way is what we call a synthetic approach. What's a synthetic approach? Well, it's when we go step by step, building up little by little. This is what artists do when they want to reproduce an image, right? You're looking at each piece of the image. You draw a grid over the image. You're looking at each piece as you go, and you're focusing on each one separately, and you're focusing on accuracy, right? So you have this place where you're reproducing the image into, and each piece that you draw is accurate, right? The angle is accurate here. Okay? Each piece is accurate, and you build up little by little. So in a language learning environment, what's happening here is that each of these boxes could represent, let's say, the language form of the day, right? So one day we are focused on the past tense, and then conditionals, and so on. Week by week, we're doing different things until the picture is complete. Now, what's the problem with this approach from a language learning point of view? The problem is that if you're an artist reproducing a picture, then this process just takes a couple of hours. From a language learning point of view, this is a process that would take months and years to build up the language in your head piece by piece. So assuming that we're not computers that can just have immediate recall and don't have to deal with things like delayed gratification, right? Motivation. This is not a particularly motivating way to learn languages. It could work if you're a computer. And to be fair, some people do learn better this way, and you can learn different things this way. But this synthetic approach basically is focused on accuracy. And this is the way most textbooks are written. This is the grammar syllabus, right? A grammar syllabus presents all of the information piece by piece, one by one, and levels them by difficulty. So how can we focus on meaning instead? Well, let's go back to our bowl of marbles. We focus on meaning, but first of all, by looking at the target holistically, and by looking at what we're doing in a meaningful way right from the beginning. Okay? And the outcome assessment is that you have done the thing that has been asked. So the student is asked, draw a bowl of marbles, and they do this, okay? This could be the first step for a low-level language learner in this analogy with the bowl of marbles, right? Now, is this good? Well, no, it's not. Is it accurate? Not really, no, right? Like you can count the number of marbles, it doesn't match, right? It's not really particularly accurate. But is it a bowl of marbles? Yes, it is, right? The outcome has been achieved. The student has done what they have been asked to do. It's accurate enough to fulfill the task. Okay? So we can look at it and we can tell that it's meaningful right from the beginning. It might be a simple image, but we know what it is, right? And this is how we focus on meaning from a language learning point of view as well. So rather than go in a synthetic way, we go in this kind of holistic, meaningful way. And what do? We provide feedback to the student, right? It's meaningful from the beginning. You ask the students to do the task, they do it, they get feedback, they get better and better, they add more and more detail as they go along. Perhaps sometimes you focus on certain details. You might, spend a class focusing on shading. You might spend a class focusing on colors. Some details that you focus on might actually regress, and the overall accuracy of the picture might get temporarily worse. But eventually you get to that end task. You get better and better, and you reach that target. And this is how a meaning primary sort of framework should work. So these are the two sort of approaches that a textbook can take. As you know, a synthetic approach is almost invariably the only way the textbooks are written. To have a meaning-based approach is actually quite difficult. So how does it work in widgets? Well, I'm going to go through the book in sort of, again, quick detail, but you can ask questions later. If you would like to look at a copy of the book, if you go to widgetpedia.com, our website, you can actually look through the first couple of chapters of the book are available. So how does it work? Well, how do we focus? First of all, let's look at those three things. Meaning is primary, right? So how does widgets create meaning as a primary thing? Well, it creates a lifelike scenario which simulates where the students are working as interns at a company, okay? So it focuses on this authenticity. And then within that lifelike scenario, they work on tasks and projects that are all meaningfully connected to each other. And that again heightens the sort of authenticity of what they're doing, the meaningfulness of it all. And the course also includes high quality videos that model tasks. And this not only heightens the sense of realism, but it also helps the students to model what they're going to be doing. So the book is divided up into 6 stages. Stage 1 is the orientation. And I'll go through the stages quickly here. They join the company and they are introduced to themselves, to each other, and to various characters in the book that help them along. So this is the director of research and development. They meet each other, they make name tags, they greet each other, shake hands, and they learn about the company. They watch videos with the CEO and other people from the company talking about what the company does. And they also look at some of the products that the company makes. And in the case of widgets, the company makes technological devices that help you in your life. In this case, we're looking at the scale shoes that help you to know how much you weigh at every point of the day if you just look at your foot. And they do sort of discussions about these products, which one is good, which one is not. They rank them as to which are viable products in the marketplace and things like that. In stage 2, they are then moved, they're put into teams and moved into the research and development section of the company. So they look at some example products that may or may not have been good products. They are presented with examples of ideas that maybe are good, not so good. They look at product proposals that have been submitted before. They watch elevator pitch videos, and then the final task for them is to make an elevator pitch video. And I'll show you an example of this shortly. And they present their own product. So the end stage task is the elevator pitch, right? A 1-minute video that they produce. Then in stage 3, they go through, they're still in the same teams that they were put in, but the ideas that they created are passed between the teams. So now the stage 3 team is given instructions that they have to perform a SWOT analysis, which is a business tool for debating pros and cons of things. And they decide which product to move forward into production. And once they do that, they write a report about the product, why it was good, and as well as why they didn't select the other products. And they do a poster presentation as their end task for stage 3. You may at this point consider how a poster presentation is a little bit more complex than a 1-minute elevator pitch, right? It's live, for example, rather than video recorded. It's longer than 1 minute. It requires answering questions, for example. So these are things that add to the complexity of the task as you go along. Then in stage 4, they do market research. Again, the products get passed to another team, and the new team now gets tasked with doing market research on that product that they've received. So they run a focus group, or they might do a survey. They ask people their opinions on the product. They write up a market research report on what people thought about it, whether they had suggestions for improvements and things like that. And then they give a presentation, a more formal presentation to the company about the product and what can be done to improve it. Again, this is a longer presentation, 5-6 minutes with each student participating. a little bit more complex than the previous presentation. Then in stage 5, they take this market research report and they design an advertising campaign, how to best reach the target market for that particular product. And again, you can see that the complexity of the task is increasing quite a bit. This is an example of the actor doing a model presentation of the advertising campaign. They present the entire advertising campaign. And then finally in stage 6, we have a wrap-up stage, which is where students finish the product cycle and they also finish their internships. Congratulations, the story's finished, you have done what you have been asked to do. And then they write a CV, a resume, and apply and participate in a job interview to get a full-time job in the company. Now, the interesting thing to think about here is not just complexity. We can see the complexity goes up as they go through the stages, but also in a virtual way, even though complexity is going up, it allows students to recycle the language that they're using because they're talking about the same, they're on the same topic basically all semester, but it also allows them to be comfortable enough to use that language as the task becomes more complex. A job interview is quite complex, but having done the tasks already, when you get to this point and the interviewer asks the student something like, it says here on your resume that you were participated in an advertising campaign. Can you tell me about that? And now the student can tell you about that because they've done it, right? It might say, you were the project manager. Did you have any trouble with being a project manager? Can you tell me what that is like? And they can answer that question again in a meaningful way. It's not simply a display question. They're using their virtual experience of what they've done. And they cycle through all the projects this way. So even though the complexity raises quite quickly, it's still achievable. The second point, so I've been talking about meaningfulness and how the project cycle adds and enhances meaningfulness. Let's go back to stage 1 to talk about how they are not pre-taught by the textbook how to do things. And here's an example of this is the first or second page of the book. It's their first day on the job. You see here in the green box, this is the director of the company introducing themselves and basically saying, we're going to start by making name tags. And the rubric says simply, look at these example name tags. And here are 2 example name tags. There is no more information, right? The next part of the page continues this way. So the students look at the name tags, they read the interesting facts, and then they think of a question they could ask each person. So let's look at Michael here. Interesting fact about Michael, I'm a drummer in a band. Well, what kind of question could they ask? There's no vocabulary here that's guiding them. There's no grammar point. They are simply looking at that and going, ooh, a drummer, what can I say? And the student will say something surely like, what kind of music do you like? Or, what's your favorite drummer? And things like that. And then they make their own name tags. So again, they're not pre-taught how to do it. They're not given examples of vocabulary such as, what's your hobby? Or, what kind of food do you like? They're not giving any of these things. They're simply asked, what's an interesting fact? Now, for the teacher in the classroom, it may very well be that the student will raise their hand and say, oh, how do I say this? And so on. And of course, that's the teacher's job in the classroom to help the student. But this provides the framework, the meaningful framework, without pre-teaching them what to do. And the third point, assessment by task outcome. So again, how do we assess these tasks by task outcome? The big problem in a language learning classroom is that what tends to happen is teachers tend to reduce assessment to looking at items such as grammar points, mistakes that they made in pronunciation and things like that. And that can't happen in a TBLT framework. So we're going to look at an example. You see in this rubric, you would first ask, did they achieve the task? Yes or no? Just simply a yes or no question, right? So is the task achieved? Does that pizza arrive? Is it a bowl of marbles, right? That's a yes or no answer. If yes, then how well is it achieved? And now the teacher can consider, is it an A, a B, a C, or a D, right? Or I like using a 10-point system. And then they give feedback. So let's look at an example. So this is an elevator pitch. The outcome is that the student will have pitched a clear, easy to understand idea in a persuasive manner, okay? It should be 1 minute long, and it must clearly explain the function of the thing, and they can use appropriate props, appropriate to an elevator pitch, right? So let's take a look at what the student does. This is just 1 minute long.
Hello, I'm going to talk about my new product idea. This product will help many people who don't sleep immediately. I think many people has a trouble recently that they can't sleep immediately because their work and their phone. So I want to solve this problem. So I came up with this idea that I called Good Night Box. Good Night Box can let people fall asleep. So prepare your phone, and this is a Good Night Box. And how to use this? Good Night Box connect into this area. Phone has a hole in this area, and gas comes from here. The gas can make people sleep. So this is easy. What do you think of this idea?
Okay, so now please think of this idea. And I'm sorry to those of you who may have watched this presentation before, but I'm using a student because I have permission to use this particular student. But let's ask ourselves, does the student pass? Yes or no? And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'll assume that everyone is saying yes. And therefore, the next question will be, do they get an A, a B, a C, a D, and well, that's it, right? They can't get an F because they've already passed. So why don't you please write into the chat, do you think it's an A, B, C, or D? In other words, is it a 10, a 9, 8, 7? Just type the letter or number into the chat. A B. I'm not going to wait too long, so we've got a couple of Bs. This in terms of rate or reliability, this is not a good process because we're looking at each other's scores, and now no one's going to rock the boat and give it a C or an A, right? Yeah, it tends to be B. It tends to be reliable, or an 8, right? It tends to be quite reliable. And in fact, this is the way I graded it, right? So this is how I made a rubric and I gave it to the student. So I gave the student a B, and I basically said, excellent work, you did well, it was quite fluent. There were, however, a couple of small mistakes you should think about. Whoops. So for example, they said the phone has a hole, right? So that's a good example of using strategy to make the meaning clear. But perhaps in the future you can say, you know, there's a port, or you can find a better term for it. You give whatever feedback is appropriate to your students, to your level. Of course, if this were a graduate level class, if you were teaching an MBA, probably this wouldn't be an 8, right? It could be a 6 in that kind of context. But certainly, even in that case, it would be a pass. So one issue that teachers sometimes have is the idea that this kind of grading is subjective, but really we can see that, you know, we got pretty much 8s and Bs across the board. It is actually quite reliable way of grading. It's at least as reliable as a grammar quiz that you might make yourself. So this is how we do grading in widgets, and this is how we basically target those 3 points that I mentioned earlier. But those aren't the only points. There are other aspects of TBLT that are important, and I'll mention them just briefly. One of the key aspects, and this is important for materials writing, is the organization by task complexity. So it's a challenge for teachers using widgets sometimes. It's a challenge for me when I'm showing the book, because when teachers flip open the book to any particular page, they, you know, almost always they say, oh, this is too easy for my students, or whoa, this is way too difficult for my students. And that's because it's not a consistent level of complexity throughout the book, right? It builds on itself, but it works because it builds on the existing scenario, right? So for example, stage 1, they're making name tags, right? And shaking hands, very simple, easy tasks. But by stage 6, they're interviewing for a job. So quite a big ramp up in complexity. So the tasks are interconnected, they build on each other. This allows for a clear progression in task complexity, which is something that's often missed in communicative teaching, right? Without this kind of progression, it's hard to assess whether students are actually improving. So if you have a class that's based on discussions, for example, it tends to be a little bit difficult to judge if they're getting better or not. And this is a systematic way of doing that in TBLT. Another point that's important is self and peer evaluation, as well, of course, as teacher evaluations. So the book is built in so that each team is also scoring the other teams as well. This works really well because they have done the project themselves, so that when they judge another team's quality of their project, they're basing it on what they've already known of their own project. And self-evaluation is a really important part of the book. This is what we call paperwork in the sense of authenticity of the book. But basically, the students are looking at what they have done through the stage and how well they've done it. So I can participate well in small group discussions and things like that. They're judging these things themselves, and they're also thinking of what they're going to do to improve. This is really important for progression, right? And especially when you've got a book where you don't have grammar quizzes, you don't have spelling quizzes and things like that. So you need to base your assessment on something real, solid, and having a self-assessment, peer assessment is important to balance out teacher assessment. We also offer all kinds of other things that are lesson plans and other support. If you go to our website, you'll see, for example, lesson plans that are quite flexible. So we've prepared them lesson by lesson, so week by week. So if you've got 30 90-minute lessons, you'll have 30 lesson plans day by day, as well as 15 by 90 and 30 by 50. And of course, these are flexible. So if you've got 100-minute periods, the 90-minute lessons are easy enough to adapt. So we provide these for teachers because we know that this style of teaching is a little bit new, perhaps, for most teachers. So we provide all of these things that they're looking for. Answer keys, a lot of the questions that we have are sort of open-ended, opinion-based questions, but we provide sort of possible answers, range of possible answers that students can come up with. Syllabus templates as well, because if you're teaching at a university, you often have to provide those templates, so we have these ready as well. We have videos. All the course videos are here, so you can actually watch all the videos for the course. We've got various user example as well from students, like the one that we saw. We have some supplementary information about TBLT and course extras. One of the interesting extras we have actually is from Mark Hagelson's suggestion. Well, Mark Hagelson, of course, is a famous textbook writer as well and professor here in Japan. And he was using widgets, and he said, hey, at the end of the course, I'd like to have like some kind of certificate of completion for the students. And I thought, great idea. So I came up with this and set it up so that teachers can download it, fill in their information, and give it to the student, frame it if you like. And it's a nice way of saying, hey, you've just done this business internship simulation course. And finally, coming soon in Widgets 3, we're developing new things that we feel we've missed so far. A needs analysis component will be added to the 3rd edition. This is something that's really important in TBLT, but it's, again, a little bit tricky to sort of operationalize into a textbook, but we've got some ideas of what to do. We've got some pre-task peer evaluation models. So what we just did when we watched that example presentation, we've got something like that for students as well, where they also watch other students doing the tasks at various levels of how well they did, and they then discuss how they did, so that they are now better prepared and thinking about what the criteria are for the teacher when they do their own presentation. We have improved rubrics for assessment and a better framework for the book. We actually have too much material. The book is quite difficult to finish within one semester unless you go at breakneck speed, as I feel I've done today in this presentation. So I'm going to wrap it up here and allow for the interview part. So thanks a lot for listening and staying on. This is my contact information. Please send me an email anytime. I'm happy to discuss widgets from a research perspective, a materials writer's perspective, a practical teacher's perspective. Whatever your angle, please let us know your thoughts and experiences. And thanks again. See you at the next thing, JOLT members. So John.
Thank you, Marcos. That was fantastic.
Thank you very much.
And it wasn't that wasn't breakneck fit. My neck is fine.
I think mine.
I was holding on, but excellent. Thank you for doing that for us. All right, so we're gonna have about a half an hour interview, but if you do have questions, you can pop them in the chat and try to get to those after the interview. Please write as many questions as you can for Marcos. So Marcos, you've written this is going to be the 3rd edition of Widgets, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Let me stop sharing here, so it'll be there we go. This is going to be the 3rd edition. Yes, we're on the 2nd edition now. The 1st edition was published in 2008 from Pearson.
Okay. And let me just start with the interview. What inspired you to originally write task-based textbook, particularly Widgets, which is kind of a unique take on it?
Yeah, well, when I first I started teaching part-time in university in Japan. This was around 2004, 2005. No, 2003, 4. Yeah, around that time. I had recently finished my master's, and at that time I had specialized in task-based language teaching. And I was teaching in Okinawa with my co-author, Chris, and we were teaching various oral communication courses using big, boring 80s era global textbooks. But these books were not appropriate. They not only was the approach itself wrong for communicative classes, but the nature of the grammar syllabus is such that the textbooks were very strictly leveled. And unfortunately, our classes were mixed level. They weren't very strictly leveled by proficiency. So, either it was too hard or too easy for any particular student. That's a big problem with textbooks. So we started creating our own lessons and sharing them back and forth with each other. And basically, the first sort of idea was, hey, let's have students come up with these funny product ideas. Chris had a book called, in Japanese, it's Shindogu. In English, it's called Unuseless Inventions.
Yeah, I've seen that book.
Yeah, so we looked through it and we thought, yeah, this is kind of funny. Let's see if we can get students to do some funny products and then make a commercial based on it. A group skit, basically. And that worked really well. So then we started adding to that task and making sort of longer projects. So we're going to, they've come up with this product and they've done a commercial. Now let's do market research and see what people think about the product and see if we can get some interesting feedback and do presentations on that and so on. And eventually we had enough material for a book. So that's basically it. It came out of our classroom.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. And I did have a question about how do you think students acquire language using this approach? I mean, if they don't have vocabulary lists to study or they don't have quizzes to go through those, do they take down notes? Or I know they're recycling a lot of the vocabulary as they go through the course.
Right.
But how would you say is the main way that they acquire language?
Yeah, that's basically it, is paying attention to what's going on, right? Taking notes and paying attention to important vocabulary as it pops up, important grammar forms as they're trying to say something and they find that they don't know the grammar for it. They then ask the teacher at the point of need, right? Scott Thornbury has talked about how the importance of this in communication is. When they're at that point of need and they need to say something, that's when the teacher can jump in and give them some language support. Well, what I find interesting, so like when we talk broadly about textbooks, right? And by textbooks, I mean anything, paper books, apps, whatever. Produced materials sequence grammar and lexis to be covered, right, in a supposedly logical way. And then it's up to the teacher to make that material engaging and create sort of communicative opportunities, right?
Mhm.
And that's the way, all textbooks are done. So the textbook gives you this framework of like easy to difficult grammar forms and so on. And maybe that works really well for really low level grammar, really low level classes, because they're all generally needing the same kind of things, right? But
Right.
once you go up in level, they kind of diverge in their language needs, and they're, they become, the teachability hypothesis tells us that especially higher level learners don't necessarily learn what we're teaching. There's a developmental sequence of grammar that we learn, and higher level learners may be kind of in different places as to what they're
Right.
needing. So having a textbook that presents grammar, and then having the teacher, on the other hand, have to make that material engaging and communicative is, I think, kind of problematic. What I think works better is the other way. If you flip that around and you have the textbook present that kind of engaging content,
Right.
engaging framework, and then the teacher who's there in the room and knows what the student needs, right, and is the expert on language teaching, the teacher can make a decision at the point of need and say, oh, hey, there's this grammar form that would really help you. Here you go. Hey, class, look at this. I noticed many of you are making this mistake, and
Right.
you write
Right.
it on the
So,
board, and that's when you focus on the language, right?
right. Then you have
So,
your teachable moment.
exactly. So it's the textbook then becomes this engaging thing that helps you to create teachable moments in the classroom, right? Rather than presenting you with these things that you have to cover, and then
Sure.
your job is like, geez, how do I make this interesting?
You have to jump around.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it. It's not like it's impossible, but I just
Right.
think for me, it works better the other way around, right? So,
Right. And I imagine in a smaller class, it's a little easier to do that, or to
mhm,
get a little bit more interaction between the students and the teacher.
mhm. Yeah, well, definitely. It scales. It doesn't scale very well, this kind of approach, right? This is why I say it's ideal when you've got 12 to 24 students, but once you have 40, you can still do it, but you have to be much more systematic on how you do it. And then you might have to present some of the language. You might have less opportunity to
Right.
notice what everyone's doing. Yeah, definitely.
Right. And do you find that the students, I imagine you use this in your own classrooms, that the students ask a lot of questions, or they run into issues where they don't know the language and they do need help from either their phone or the teacher or another classmate?
Yeah, of course, they run into problems all the time. The teacher's job then becomes much more of a facilitator, and one of the, ironically enough, one of the problems with this approach is that the students get so excited and engaged that they forget to speak English because they want to share meaning. If you want to be meaningful, to communicate, they want to go through the path of least resistance. So they're like, oh, they just start talking in Japanese. So then your job as a teacher becomes facilitating. You're walking through the room and just making sure, hey guys, don't forget the point of this. We are in a language class. Let's
Right,
keep it
right.
in English,
Yeah.
and kind of helping them a little bit that way. But yeah, increasingly they go off the track that way.
Yeah. So
But, but
let me ask you about like teachers who are not so familiar with task-based approaches to language learning and teaching, but they're interested in your book. What would you advise them to do? Or would they be able to use the book even if they haven't heard of task-based language teaching?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. If they're interested in trying out the approach honestly, then sincerely, then it of course you can do it. But it's not what most of us are used to, right? We go into the classroom thinking, okay, how do I do assessment? Oh, I can give a quiz at the end or whatever. But doing that undermines the communicative value of what you're doing, right? So if you have the students, even forget TBLT for a minute, if you have your students, have a conversation about what they did in the summer, right? They're talking about what they did in the summer, and then you give them a quiz, or you're evaluating them on whether they're using particular vocabulary.
Right.
That sort of undermines the communicativeness of it, right? So, but that's, most teachers aren't used to that, so it takes a little bit of figuring it out. But that's why the lesson plans we have online are so step by step. The teacher can just basically page week by week read the page and just follow through, and then they'll get it as they go.
As you know, student motivation is one of the primary factors in having a successful classroom, right? And I know you engage your students with those kind of goofy products,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
um, which are quite funny. And I imagine they enjoy looking at those and trying to figure out how they work and what their purpose is. But how else is the textbook able to engage students in the language or in the material?
Well, because it's authentic. Actually, to be honest, the goofiness of the products is just it's a minor part of the book as the book has evolved over the years. It's meant to be, you know, a little bit quirky, but what we do is we have the students judge whether those products are actually viable in the real world. So that's one of the initial tasks that they do. So it's not, we're not encouraging them necessarily to come up with a goofy product. The point is to come up with something creative. But the way we set it up that's engaging is that it's experience for, you know, their future workplace. So it works really well for adults because we say, look, this is an authentic internship kind of experience, right? Yes, it's not authentic in every way, of course, but this gives you a lot of the vocabulary you might need if you're working in an English-speaking workplace. And that is motivating to university students. And so that's the other way we kind of sell the idea to them. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to know about how students interact with each other in this course. I imagine they work on projects together,
Yeah.
and do they help each other trying to launch a successful project, or is it just pure evaluation, working on like a solo idea?
No, they're working in teams. So at each stage, they're in a team, and the team is doing something. So within the team, they are discussing with each other what's the best choice. They're debating the pros and cons and so on. When they give a presentation towards the end of the book, it's a team presentation. And also one of the things this allows, and one of the factors of the book is that the team actually doesn't change. Ideally, it's the same team all semester. And one of the advantages of this is that then each team member can be team leader at one of the stages, right?
Right.
So they help each other that way as well. What often happens, for example, that's interesting is the very first student who is chosen in stage 2 as the team leader is often the best in the group, right? They're more confident than all of the others. Usually the one who gets selected first is the top student in that group. And what happens is they set the bar really high for how to be a team leader. And the other students who may be a little bit lazier and don't want to jump into being team leader, they end up being team leader later when it's a much more complex task, right? But they can still succeed because the other students who have been team leader can kind of help them along. They've had that experience, right? So even that is kind of genuine and authentic. What we found is that once you look at that greater authenticity of the book and you create this big scenario that's real life-like, a lot of the problems you solve within that scenario are themselves authentic and genuine and have value. So that's another advantage of this sort of themed approach.
Right. It seems like they're actually doing team building
Yeah.
within the class.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Like they would do at a workplace.
Exactly. Mhm.
Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit to more of the creative process and the business end of things. And I think we do have some questions in the chat, and we'll get to those at the Q&A time. So hold on, Kevin, a little bit. So you've written several books, textbooks for major publishers and for your own company and graded readers. What is your creative process like? Is it random? Is it very regimented? Is it it depends on the season or depends on the project?
As far as just basic creative process, I'm always coming up with new ideas. I'm kind of insufferable for my poor colleague who has the office down the hall here because I'm always every week coming in and going, hey, I've got this great idea for the program. But of course, not everything pans out. Not everything is good. So 1 in 5 is sort of workable. But when it comes to textbook writing, I basically take what I do in class, and I come up with ideas in the classroom, and then some of them work, some of them don't. And if they work, they kind of stick and they go into the next semester and so on. And after a while, when I'm writing a book that requires that kind of thing, that kind of lesson, I'll bring it in. Of course, it's a little different for graded readers. Graded readers are just more, I mean, they're more purely creative, I suppose. But basically, yeah, when I'm starting to write a book, I just set out a production schedule and then do things within that schedule. It'll
Are
be
you more like paper and pencil or computer right away, or how does the thought process get transferred into a textbook?
computer right away, but I'm always printing out because I want to look at what the page actually looks like and feels like. So I do all the work on the computer, but then I print out quite often little mock-ups of the book as I go because I want to get a sense of how things sit on the page. You know, layout is really important for textbooks.
Right. So do you do the layout yourself, or do you hire a designer for the final layout?
No, we hire for many things. Designer, we hire an editor. Actually, one of our editors is here as well, Greg. Real well, thank you. And we hire, and I make a point of doing that because actually I'm pretty good at design. I probably could do a decent job laying out the book, but I think it's really important to, have a second opinion, but also to have someone whose job is doing that thing. We have a tendency to be like, oh, my cousin Bill is, a really good photographer. He can take pictures for me. But it might be better to go with somebody who is focused especially on taking photos, in this case, in a business-like environment and so on. Editing is the same thing, right? Like I'm quite good, I think, at editing. I
Right.
edit my own academic articles when I do it. But when it comes to a textbook, I want to have a second look, especially from a teacher perspective. So I actually, yeah, hire out for a lot of these things. And it costs a bit more money, but in the end, you get something that's a more finished, the production value is there. And I think that's kind of important. It's a bit disappointing sometimes when you see really great materials and the cover looks kind of amateurish or something like that because teachers and students are very aware of the sort of production value these days,
Right,
making
sure.
making video is another example. Like it's really tough to make a high quality video when you're competing against things on Netflix and so on. Although you can kind of play into what's going on in the day, right? With the first edition of Widgets, we made our videos kind of intentionally cheesy because we knew we couldn't match, the quality of Friends or something. So we made them intentionally cheesy in the way that infomercials are cheesy, right? So
Right.
it's all like, buy now, because then you can kind of laugh at them and it feels kind of authentic as well, right? Now, students are watching YouTube and sometimes producing their own YouTube and so on. So that's one way you can kind of make video that's cheaper, but
Sure.
authentic at the same time, right? Is
Right,
sort
right. They've got
of,
those very kind of low quality like TikTok videos where they're just kind of hovering in front of
yeah,
whatever they're talking about, and I think anybody could do those, and it would have
exactly.
that certain quality. Uh,
Exactly. And in fact, what we're doing right now is a video conference, right? So this is one of the things in the book. When the students meet, so some of the videos in the book are the directors of the company talking to the students about what they should do. And
okay,
it's set up as a video call, right?
okay,
So that's another example of how you can sort of creatively like find ways of making the materials a little cheaper, more affordable as a
yeah.
material.
You hired like a like actors or
Yes.
a video crew. Where did you hire them from? From the States or from overseas or
Well,
in
our
Japan?
video crew is a video guy, actually. It was a guy, you guys, some of you may know him, Jack Henry, had been in Japan teaching in Hiroshima, I think. And he produced a couple of videos for Jolt a few years back. Now he's back in Wales, but at the time he was here and he did some really good stuff. And we were like, hey, can we hire you for doing our videos? And he did a great job. The actors are, sad to say, but it's quite cheap to get actors. I think for a couple of $100 we got the 3 actors for the day. And the important thing with the actors in this case is because we wanted somebody whose face reoccurs, right? So they
Right.
made the videos and then we did photo shoots and then we used their images throughout the book. But it was all done in one day. So it can be done. Like you need to kind of, when I say this to other material writers, they often go like, oh, I don't have money for video. I mean, yeah, it does cost a couple of $1,000, sure, but you're not talking hundreds of thousands, like it is affordable if you're being serious about creating a book that you want to sell. So,
Right, right. Okay, let me just ask you about, are there any, oh, well, we were talking about layout a little bit. Do you do like a basic layout and then you give it to a graphic designer who's also a teacher or kind of knows?
no, the graphic designer, our designer is, she used to work for Pearson, and now she just does freelance work, and she's based here in Japan. So and she was actually the designer who did the original widget. So when we did the second edition, it was great to be able to get her on board.
Okay,
So she knows very well how to design ELT materials. And so we do a kind of, we have the manuscript and we have a kind of laid out version that's very kind of quick and dirty, but
right.
gives her an idea of what the book looks like. In fact, I have an example here of one of the original kind of manuscripts of widgets. So we laid this out using, I think, Microsoft Word. We just put pieces on the page because this helps the designer to understand what we're looking for, and then she just makes it look pretty. This just looks terrible, right? So yeah, that's the way it works.
How long does it take you to complete a book, start to finish, if you can give like a rough estimate?
Yeah, for a brand new book, it would probably be about 2 years, I think, would be the minimum, because we would need to have a cycle of actually trying things out in the classroom and getting feedback from other teachers. That's also really important. Where sometimes we forget to, we write our thing that works for us, but we forget to check if it also works for other teachers using the same material. But if we're doing another edition of an existing book, then it's much quicker, maybe about a year.
Okay, so you'd give like a lesson plan to a teacher and say, hey, do you mind trying this out and giving us feedback on how it worked for you?
Yeah, yeah. We usually, like for example, we have the people who had been using widgets for a number of years. So we just tapped them and said, hey, we're working on this other book now called Case Studies. If you have time and you want to do these readings in your class, they fit. It was a book that fit really well with widgets, so it was easy to do, give them a chapter to try out. And of course, using them in our own classroom, because that helps us to get ideas of, the types of questions that students ask or the kind of things that fall flat, don't quite work. It's really important. So.
All right, so do you get feedback from people who have been using your textbooks? They said, this doesn't work, or could you add this, or could you change that? Does that influence you in the coming edition?
Yeah, absolutely. Mark Hagelson, I mentioned earlier, has used the book for a number of years. I think he's retiring this year. And he has always been, I mean, he's a materials writer too, right? So he's always been quite good about sending feedback and things that work and don't work and ideas to add. So he's been a great help, but other people around as well. Kevin, who's here today too, has given lots of feedback over the years. I don't know if he's actually used it, but he knows the book quite well.
Right.
And so, yeah, friends, colleagues, it's important to reach out.
Okay, so just to wrap it up a couple of questions on the business end. You have written books for major publishers, and then I guess you decided one day you're going to start your own company, Atama E. Why did that come about?
So we got really lucky when we got the first edition of Widgets with Pearson. I mean, I say lucky, but there was strategy to it as well. That was an unsolicited proposal. We just sent them the proposal and said, here's our book, do you want to publish it? And they accepted it. That almost never happens, right? And even back then, this is 2007, almost didn't happen then either. But the strategy was that we knew that it would be a small book. It's a single issue, it's not a series, right? We knew that the video wouldn't be that expensive to produce, and it was complete, basically. So we gave them a complete package and said, this works really well in our classes, here's feedback. They did some trials, focus groups and things, and it worked well. So that's how we got in. So we got really lucky right away with the first book. But the problem there was that we were a small fish in a big pond, right? It's great to be published with Pearson in many ways, and I learned a lot about publishing by writing with them. But once the book was released, it was like it disappeared into their catalog, and So what we wanted was, ironically enough, I went with Abax for my next book. And because Abax is a smaller company, it was even smaller at the time and based in Japan, I actually, ironically enough, got even more publicity because it was, one of their big book, we won awards and things. So it was in their interest to get the word out. So that worked really well. But even there, I felt a bit restricted. I just wanted to do my own thing and not have to submit proposals and things like that. So I just started my own company.
Okay, but you had published with Pearson, and then you published with Abex. But did you publish the same book after that, or was it a new edition? Because I'm
No,
wondering about
with
the
Abax.
copyrights and the licensing agreements.
No, sorry, that was a totally different book. We published Widgets with Pearson, and then with Abax we published Whodunit, which is a reading book, and that was with a different co-author. And then that one won a couple of awards, so that created a big buzz, which then allowed me to contact McGraw-Hill and publish a graded reading series with them, Choose Your Own Adventure.
All right, right.
Which has a lot of name recognition again, right? So it kind of built up on that. And but that didn't stay in print very long, unfortunately. Yeah, and I also worked with Compass, and that came out of the fact that at my university we used their book Reading for Speed and Fluency, and we had been using the older edition. And so I contacted them one day and I said, hey, we're using this older edition, but it's really old. Are you guys thinking of doing a new edition? And if you are, I've got a team that will do it. And we had an adoption, because we were using the book. So we did that, and that was with Paul Nation as well. So we were working in that case as a kind of secondary authors.
Right.
That was more of a hired gun kind of job, but it provided some money that we then put into Widgets for the second edition.
Okay, so the second edition of Widgets was through Atamai, right? Okay, so there was no, so the first edition, is it still in print, or do they still sell it through Pearson?
No, they went out of print. We initially approached them and said, hey, do you guys want to do a second edition? And they said, nah, they weren't interested in such a small book, right? So we said, okay, in that case, can we get the rights back? And then we redid it and published it.
Okay, so you had to get the rights back from them through negotiations, or did you have to pay them out, or?
When we signed the contract, there was a clause in there saying that if the book is out of print for 3 years, and that's a standard clause in a contract, right? So if a book is out of print for a certain number of years, the rights should revert back to the author. It's important to make sure that kind of clause is always in there. But so that was the case, and then we just said, like, look, we'd like to publish it. You're not doing anything with it. Can we have it back? And we worked that out. We couldn't use, of course, we couldn't use the layout and graphics that they had designed. So we couldn't just print exactly the same book, and we couldn't use the video and things like that. But that's fine, because we just made a new, we made lots of changes and created a new video.
Okay, great, very good information. Why don't we open it up to the audience? And I think Kevin's got a question up there. If you guys don't mind turning on your camera. Well, maybe Kevin's not here anymore.
I'm right here.
Oh, there you are, Kevin. Sorry.
You're asking a
get
question.
lost on these things. Kevin, do you want to?
Yeah, if I could start. Well, Marcus, thanks a lot. I've kind of been involved since the first Widgets, and it's just great to see how the project has developed over the years, and always a big fan. So thanks for that. And I've seen your talks before, even tonight, learned some new things. So that was really great. And as I just put in the chat, I'm actually interested in maybe getting back into Widgets after a long time. I did use it, the original Widgets, but I haven't used the new edition. But I have a course starting next year, and I'm kind of thinking, wow, baby, I really enjoyed teaching the original one, so I thought I'd love to get back into it. But it would be a year-long course, and I saw that I did take a quick look at the lesson plans. You mentioned some people say it's a little hard to fit into one semester, so I thought, well, great, can I use the 30-week plan? So I was wondering though, how does that go? Have you done it as a 30-week over 2 semesters? And what about that big long summer break? How does that work out? Do the students they come back and you're like, okay, get in the same groups? You know, do they?
Yeah, we're making a number of changes and making some things a little more flexible. So the groups is one of the things that doesn't work that way because sometimes you get students who come back and sometimes you don't, or you get like new students in the class. So if you're going to have a break between semesters, that's often can be a problem. But if you're planning on doing that, Kevin, just let us know. And our plan right now is actually to split the book into stages. Basically the first half of the book will be book one, and the second half will be book two. So it's still the same scope, but it'll be divided up into two books, which then allows us to provide much more support as we go through. And it creates this kind of nice sort of middle point where you could stop or you can continue with book two if you want to, right? So some people we imagine will just be using book one, and some people may actually just use book two because they'll want higher level tasks. But if you're planning to do something like that, just get in touch with me, and we're happy, Chris and I are happy, anybody, to actually work with you and see what we can do to make, provide kind of bespoke materials, even if it's something we can do.
Yeah, great. That sounds great. I'll reach out to you.
That's one of the nice things of being a small company, right? Like I call all the shots, so I can be like, yeah, of course, we'll do something for you.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, Marcus, I got another question about you videotaped some of your students doing the elevator pitch and the final presentation. And I think you may have mentioned that the students can watch those videos, or are they available online? I know we watched one today. Is that available for the general public?
That one is because we had a number of students who agreed to allow their videos to be shown. And so there are some that are available on the website. But as far as teaching the class, they produce their videos, and then within the class, they watch each other's videos. So usually we set up something like a Google folder, or at my school now, we actually use YouTube, but not in a public way, right? So they upload their videos because we have the Google account, like the whole like Google suite, which includes YouTube. So they upload it to YouTube, and then they watch each other's, and they give feedback and so on, and then they can remove their videos from YouTube later if they want to.
Do they ever watch students from previous years?
Yeah, that's what I'm working on now, is trying to come up with a system of at least having some options from previous years, because what it allows is for them to peer assess in a little bit of a more impartial way. Because if they're assessing students in their own class right now, then it's kind of tough, right, to give honest feedback. But if it's somebody that they don't know from a couple of years back, that works a little better. And so that's what we're hoping to set up for the third edition, is to have some of these examples where they watch the example, just like we did, right? Like they'll watch the example and be like, yeah, that was pretty good, but he could have improved this and he could have improved that. And then they go off and do their own video, which then will be better because they've thought about these things, right? So
right. I think a lot of the, especially in the Asian countries, they have this. Well, in Japan, they have the senpai kohai, seniors and juniors sort of mindset, and they kind of look to their seniors or the people who've gone before them as people who could model a certain way of doing things. So that might be a good way to go.
Yeah. We're still kind of in the early stages for the third edition, but that's one of the things we're hoping to include.
And how about like when they're getting ready to do their elevator pitch, and they need the language to do that, right? Do you encourage them to practice often, or before they do the video recording, or would you rather have them do it without much preparation?
Well, there's several ways you can do it, right? So if you're pressed for time and you don't have 2 or 3 weeks to devote to the task, then you could do it sort of quick and dirty, in which case, of course, the quality will be lower, but then you just make it clear to the students that you're grading them on lowered criteria. But yeah, the book has a video presentation that's modeled, and it includes the script of what the video says. So weaker students often tend to follow that script quite closely. whereas students who are a bit more advanced will play with it a little bit more, and they won't necessarily follow the script. So they can, they have the option to kind of mimic a little bit. It's not, super communicative if you're going to do that, but it can help them to develop some confidence that then they can bring back for the next task. So that's good too. The other nice thing about the video is that you can record as many times as you want, right? So as a student who's low confidence, they can kind of do it, until they're happy with it.
Right. And what kind of advice do you give students who are uncomfortable in front of the camera? Because I know some students get extremely stiff,
Right.
nervous in front of the camera. Do you give them any advice on, presentation skills, like video presentation?
Oh, sure. I mean, we sort of analyze a couple of different examples, and we say what's good and bad about this, what this guy's doing, how can you do better, here's some ideas. But of course, in any kind of teaching situation, giving them some reasonable accommodation for example, if a student is really shy, doesn't want to do a video, I tell them, look, you can audio record it, or you can do it live with me in my office or something like that. As long as it doesn't, I mean, it's got to be reasonable, right? It can't be such an accommodation that then they don't have to do the project at all. But
Right.
I don't want to hog the stage, but could I ask one more? If anyone else feels free to jump in. But so I love the kind of funny product ideas, and I don't know if it made to the second issue, but the cat water wings and things like that are great. But I wonder if you've heard from any people who've used the book where you have those examples, but then they've used it for students who are doing something. They're either business students, or in my case, they're going to be engineering or architecture students, and they've used it where they actually had to make a more serious proposal. An engineering students who actually had to make a product that would be, stand up to the standards of maybe their actual engineering faculty or architecture or business or something like that. I wonder if you've heard any feedback in that respect and how that's gone, or
the quirkiness of the products is just it's not a necessary quality of the book, right? The book is meant to be a little quirky throughout, but it's not comedy, it's not like slapstick. So the products that the students come up with are themselves, they should be good. One of the things that they're doing is doing market research to see if people would buy this product and how they would advertise it. So if they're doing like something that is actually appropriate to the real world, then yeah, of course. Engineering students, we've had, there's an engineering school that uses the book, and they take that angle, they focus on the technology side of things. We've heard from teachers who use it in a kind of medical, nursing college or something like that, where they tweak the product so it's sort of medical related. So they have to come up with a new product idea, but it's something for patients, right? And you mentioned architecture, that could certainly fit, right? It would be your proposal could be the design for a new kind of house or a new, kind of bridge or whatever. So yeah,
Great,
definitely, flexibility is there. Yeah.
Marcus, I got one more question about presentations. Do you have students give like PowerPoint presentations, like showcasing their product and giving like a spiel to a potential company to take on the product?
You mean outside of the course?
No, I mean like in the course, like within the course.
The way it's set up is that when they do their presentation, they're presenting internally to the company. So they've got a product that they've been looking at, and they've done market research on it. Now they're presenting to the company and saying, we've looked at this product, we think it'll be successful because of this reason and that reason. And the audience is the other students who are part of the company.
Well, my question is, I know that you have a poster presentation, but I'm wondering if you have like a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. It goes from a poster presentation to a PowerPoint presentation. Again, in terms of complexity, right? A poster presentation is a little bit less difficult in some ways than a PowerPoint presentation. One way, for example, is that you're doing it several times over, right? With a poster presentation, because people are coming around and asking you. Whereas with a PowerPoint presentation, it's a little bit more high stakes, and you present in a more formal way. So it sort of increases the task complexity on a couple of levels.
Right. So would you say like, I mean, there's a lot of actually presenting in widgets, it seems like, because they've got the elevator pitch, they've got the poster presentation, they've got a more formal presentation. Would you say that this could be used in let's say a presentation class as a basis for doing all various types of presentations?
Yeah, sure. I think if you're going to focus, because the end task in each particular stage is a presentation of some sort, right? An elevator pitch is a presentation. It's just shorter and sort of one-on-one. But I don't see, and if you're including the interview at the end as a presentation, which I think fits too, right?
Yeah, it seems like it would be almost ideal for a presentation class, especially with the project involved, like project-based presentation class over the course.
Yeah, it's ideal, except for what's not there is what you normally have in a presentation course, which is, tips on how to present and things like that. A lot of that, there's some of that, but there's not a huge amount of that. So if but if you're just looking at the different types of presentations, yeah, it certainly could work that way.
Right, you just have to include the presentation tips itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is what I think the teacher can bring to the book, because you when you go into the classroom, you see what their level, where they are, and what you can do to help them. That's where you bring tips. You bring some of this content that is appropriate to those students that a textbook can't really help you with very well. It's either going to be too hard or too difficult. Sorry, Greg.
No, just the end of this answer and your word flexibility at the end of the previous answer brought me back to 4 or 5 points that I wrote out while you were talking about the stages. And I think we've talked about your kind of target as what works best and how some of the lessons plans and syllabi and that are kind of crafted for those 12 to 24 size classrooms with different teams and rotate things through, and even the layout in the book with some of the worksheets and that. All of the times that I've used it, I've never had more than 6 students in any of my classes. And back to that nature of how can tasks be adapted to a smaller group. So I don't really have a question. I'm just kind of adding to that notion that it is possible for people to adapt. Maybe the teams in stage 3 needs to be, changed a little bit. So what I have my students doing by altering the inputs is looking at Dragon's Den and Shark Tank videos to do SWOT analyses of those, because there isn't enough input from the participants in the class with different things. And essentially, each one of them is going to have to take theirs to market with variations through the research and things like that. So there's a certain more solo prep in mine, and maybe the project manager role gets more minimized. And the idea of how to integrate it, there may be some times where rather than doing an activity in class, it might simply be an online submission where then participants are looking at and I'm looking at. And I think the other thing, maybe 2 more things that came up during the questions, in that a lot of the motivation, I think, comes from the opportunity to do something. And I think that's often largely lacking in a lot of the university students' general courses, regardless of English language courses, but also in their English language courses. So if we're looking at achieving both a knowledge and a skills and a yoko dekiru, I can do it kind of attitude, then these are really, really useful. The other thing that becomes interesting for me is that students not only in terms of language proficiency, but they, depending on their major, they come in with different individual backgrounds. So recently I had a lower proficiency English user who was a major in marketing, who had studied those things in her first language and was really sharp. And I had someone coming in from more social science background who was much more English proficient, but didn't really know some of those strategic models and tools. So then the background knowledge that people bring to is nothing that the teacher can control. It's always part of that nuance. And just the final point that I'd like to make is anybody who's interested should have a look at the supports online that Marcos went through, because I know the question of, are people familiar with TBLT or not, but there's so much support that allows you to then creatively adapt and pull it off for whatever you have in the group that have presented themselves in front of you that semester. So yes, if you have 12 or 24 students, it's going to work well. If they've studied some business background, it's going to work well. I think, oddly enough, probably one of the best groups I had were non-business majors who had come back from some study time overseas, and they just felt this was a great chance to grind their teeth and to compete against others, and then making that link to what's going to happen in a year or two when they graduate. So I think a lot of it is how the instructor prepares and maybe adapts the materials to who they have, and then sells it as to what the benefit and what the takeaways are for the students. So huge upside, and I'm really excited about the comments that you made about the third edition, because I think those are clever add-ons that will just provide the teachers and the learners more tools. But people shouldn't be afraid to kind of take it on if they feel that it's a way they would like to teach a particular course or class, because there are lots of supports to do it however you may want to do it. It's definitely not prescriptive. So
Thanks for mentioning that, Greg, because we spent a lot of time exactly for that reason. We were thinking, how do we walk a teacher through this if they aren't really confident about TBLT? And that's why we designed those lesson plans, which, many people might use once, and then the next time around, you already kind of have an idea what you want to do. You don't need it anymore. But Chris actually did most of the work on that. I have to give him applause for that as well. It worked really well. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
Thank you, Marcus, for today. It was a fantastic presentation. Let's just give him a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank
Marcus.
you.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
Also mentioned before, but Rachel is someone who's working on a project for Atamai that hopefully, in a year or two, we'll have her doing a presentation here as well too. So
I hope so.